Now that we have our images imported into Photoshop, I'm going to create our border that we're going to use for our picture frame. So the first thing that I want to do is show you a little bit about the layers palette. So I'm going to take my layers palette right here and just put it on my screen so that we can talk about it a little bit more. So I'm going to click and hold on the tab layers and drag it out to my screen here so that we can kind of look at this. So basically, going down through the top, we can close out the palette, we can expand or contract the palette. Okay, the very top row here is basically what we can sort layers, because you're going to have images in Photoshop that may have hundreds of layers, so there may be an occasion where you need to sort through layers, and that's what this is up here. You can sort by name, by effect, by mode, attribute, and so on and so forth. Down below that we have things like blending modes, how we can blend one image into another, and then below that we can lock specific things on a specific layer. For instance, we can lock pixels, we can lock movement, or so on and so forth. But what I want to do is create a new layer that we're going to fill with a black color, and then we're going to cut out the middle of it so that we can have a frame. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a new layer by clicking on this button right here. Okay, down at the bottom, these are our layer commands, if you will. The first one here is our trash can, okay, where we can delete a layer, create a new layer, create a new group, create a fill or adjustment layer, create a layer mask, create a layer style, which is like special effects, or create linked layers. Okay, so for right now, what I want to do is create a new layer. So I'm going to click on this button, and we create our first new layer. When I do my first new layer, okay, notice that it has this kind of checkerboard pattern in it. This indicates that the layer is empty or transparent. Whenever you see this checkerboard pattern, it indicates transparency. Okay, right up here you can see here under lock, we can lock transparent pixels, for instance. Okay, but this is what transparency looks like, and layer 1 is the default layer. So I'm going to double click on that and give it a name of frame 1, because we're going to create 2 frames. So what I want to do is fill this frame with a solid color. Okay, right now our foreground color is black. Okay, if it's not black on yours, you want to click this button right here so that your foreground color is black. Okay, so I'm going to fill my image with a color. So I'm going to come down through my tool palette here. We're going to come down to where this, right in the dead center middle of our tool palette, is our gradient tool. And notice that a lot of these tool palettes have this little triangle in the bottom right hand corner. That indicates there's more tools underneath this. So if I click with my left mouse button and hold, okay, you'll notice that you'll have 3 other commands for this one. And I want to select the paint bucket tool. And when I do that, notice that this tool will change to the paint bucket tool. This paint bucket tool is a flood fill tool. You'll click in an image and it will fill it completely. In this case, because we have a blank layer. So if I click like this, it fills that image up. Okay, now I'm going to back up a step here, and we're going to do this one more time because I want to show you how to delete a layer and what happens when you do this the wrong way as well. So I'm going to take this frame 1 and I'm going to drag and drop it onto the trash can. It immediately deletes it. No warning, no anything. That's how you can delete a layer quickly. I'm going to hold down the Control and the Z command and undo one step. Because you can also be highlighted on a layer and click the trash can, and it works a little bit differently, because when I do that, it will ask me whether or not I want to delete the layer frame 1. And if I say yes, it will go away. If I click on don't show again, this won't ever pop up again for this session. So I'll say yes, and that will delete that. Okay. So if we do this the wrong way, and we say we didn't create a layer, and I'm on the flood fill tool, and I come in here to fill up an area, and I just click someplace like this, notice it just fills up this grass area, because what the flood fill tool does is it will fill an area of similar colors and hues and stop when it sees a abrupt change. So in this case here, this was green and this is brown, so it stopped right at the edge. And the same over here, this was green and gray, so it stopped right at the edge. It didn't fill in all the green because there was a big difference between the greens that we saw. So if I click again, you can see how it will fill that in, and eventually I could keep filling up this image like this and so on and so forth. So notice I've clicked several times, and now I've kind of messed this up. If I do a command or control Z, it'll back up one step. If I do a control Z again, okay, it's not going back. Okay, so in order to go back in history, up here we have this history button. Okay, and I'm going to drag and drop this out over here as well, so you can kind of expand this out. So history will show us in Photoshop what we've been doing over time, and by default this will only save a certain amount. I believe by default it's 20, and I think I've increased my history state to a larger number. The larger the history state that you create, the more memory it takes up on your computer. So you don't want to set it up to save, like, say 1,000 history states. You may want to do like 30 or 20 as the default. It's just usually good enough. But what this enables us to do is basically, we did the paint bucket several times, so I'm going to click on delete layer, and it will go back to that moment in time before I did those edits. Or I can go back to the paint bucket where I filled up frame 1, or I could go all the way back to dragging layers, okay, which is what I don't want to do. Okay, that's where we very first started. So I want to just kind of come to this moment in time right here before I, messed up. So with that done, I can basically stop at that point, and I can put history back over here and redock it over here. But just know that history is always there for you to kind of go back through your list. And if you want more history states than 20, then you have to do that through preferences, and we're not going to do that just yet. So anyway, we're going to go back and we're going to redo this by creating a new layer. Okay, this new layer, I'm going to double click on it. We're going to call it frame 1 again and hit enter. And I'm going to flood fill the frame 1 with black. Okay, so I'll just click like that and it fills up frame 1. Okay, so now what I want to do is cut out the middle portion of this, leaving a border or a frame around our image. So in order to do that, we have to come up right underneath the move tool is our first selection tool, which is our rectangular marquee tool. We have many different ways to select things in Photoshop, and as we go along I'll be introducing you to all of those methods. But for right now, the rectangular marquee tool is very simple to use by clicking on it and basically clicking someplace in your image. Make sure that you're on frame 1, and I'm going to click and drag like this, and I'm going to just use my eyes to proportionally set my border so that it's roughly the same all the way around. So here's our marching ants. This is what is currently selected. Okay, so everything inside of this selection is now selected. Everything outside of it is not. So the border out here is not selected. This is selected. So to get rid of the interior portion, all I have to do is hit the delete key, and it will delete those pixels that are currently selected. Okay, so to get rid of the selection that I have currently on my screen, okay, which is the marching ants still going around, we need to get out of that selection in order to do something else. So we can come up to select in the menu, and we can click on deselect. Okay, notice that this has a shortcut. Okay, I really strongly encourage you guys to remember some of these basic shortcuts, and eventually as you're going along through the semester, this stuff will become second nature to you. So Control D or Command D is our deselect shortcut key, or we can come up here and just click that and it will deselect that. Okay, so now we have our first frame. Okay, so with our first frame now created, we can show how that we can see the other images. Okay, so if I click on Castle Bench, we can hide that one, and we can see all of our images have a frame around them now. So if I printed this out, this is what I would get. If I printed this out, this is what I would get, and so on and so forth. Okay, by just turning layers on or off. Okay, but basically our frame is fairly plain at this point, and I want to kind of make our frame a little bit more pleasing to the eye, so to speak. So I'm on layer frame 1, and I'm going to come down here to this FX button, which is our layer styles. This lets me add special effects to an image, to a layer. Okay, so I'm going to click on this, and when I do, you can see we have things like bevel and emboss and stroke and so on and so forth. Let me just click on bevel and emboss first, and it's going to pull up a new dialog box for us. Okay, and what this lets me do is change things like the depth for the bevel, okay, or the size for the bevel. Okay, when I do that size, notice I'm getting a kind of a 3D kind of look to this. I can change it so that it's up or down. Okay, I can change the style of the bevel, whether or not it's an outer bevel. Okay, notice that this kind of has the bevel on the inside now. Okay, inner bevel, emboss, pillow emboss. Okay, stroke emboss doesn't really do much. Pillow emboss. Okay, but we're going to just keep it on inner bevel for right now, and this kind of creates a 3D kind of illusion. What's driving this is basically highlights and shadows. So you can see here we have a highlight on this edge here on the right hand side, and the same over here on the right hand side. This is controlled by the light in here. This is like a global light. So if I take and click here, for instance, you can see how I can change the light. Okay, this middle dot is basically like the equator. Not the equator, excuse me, like the North Pole. And this outer ring is like the equator. So it just depends on how high the sun is. Like if I put it right in the middle, okay, you're not going to see much on the way of highlights and shadows, but if I click it out somewhere in the middle, you can kind of see that and what direction the light is coming from. Okay, so we can do something like that, and that kind of adds some depth to our frame. Okay, maybe you don't want a 3D frame and you want something else. This is where the playing with Photoshop gets to be kind of fun. You can kind of do like a what if type of scenario. I don't want bevel and emboss, so I just uncheck it. So other things that I might want to do, maybe color overlay. Maybe I don't want a black border. Maybe I wanted a different color. So if I click on color overlay, okay, notice it turns to red. And if I highlight this so that it's blue, you can see I can actually control the color overlay here. So I can click on this color of red, and the way that the color picker works is I can come in here and select the hue that I want. So if I want my border to be green, okay, I could do something like that, and then I can change the hue and saturation of that type of green. So I can kind of go in here and say, well, I want this kind of a mossy, dark kind of green kind of border. Okay, so I could do something like that. Okay, and basically it's basically overlaying a color on top of that black. Maybe I want to have a stroke around this. So if I want that, I can click on stroke, okay, and this will basically let me create a stroked border around this. And again, this could be another color as well. So I could come in here and say, well, maybe I want that to be like yellow. Okay, so something like that, or gold. Okay, so that gives a colored stroke around the inside there. I can change this to inside like that. You can change it to center, okay, like that, okay. Or I might choose not to have a border, a stroke at all, so I can uncheck that, okay. So you can see you can kind of play around in here. Maybe you don't want a color overlay. Maybe instead of a color, you want a gradient overlay. And in this case here, you can see that gradient goes from one color to another color, from black to white. In the gradient overlay, you can drop this down and you have other gradients that you can pick from. So I can do orange and yellow, or rainbow kind of color, or like a copper kind of color. So I can have a lot of flexibility over, you know, what I want there. And you can combine these. Like I said, I can do stroke again if I wanted to. Okay, I could do a bevel and emboss on that. Okay, so you can check things on or off. In order to change each one of these styles, you have to highlight the actual command itself, bevel and emboss. You can see how it's blue here. Gradient is blue there. When I click on it, if I don't want that, I can do that. I can uncheck that. The other one that I think is usually pretty cool is the pattern overlay. This actually will take an image, a pattern, and overlay it onto your border. Okay, so by clicking on this, the default of these weird looking bubble things. So if I drop this down, these are the defaults. So I have this thing here, this one, and this one, and this one. Okay, so if I want others, I can basically click on this button right here. Oops, not that button, sorry. This button right here. And then I can click on this gear right here, which is the to access the other patterns that are preloaded into Photoshop. So for instance, I could click on Artist Surfaces. Photoshop will ask me whether or not I want to append them, or just say OK. If I want to append, it will add them to this list. If I just say OK, it will replace this list. So if I say OK, do you want to save the changes to the current palette? And I'll say don't save. Okay. So in this case here, now I have some other patterns or textures that I can use. Let's look at adding some rock patterns, say. This time I'll say append, and it adds the rock patterns in here. So now I can have like granite or stones or something like that. So maybe I like the look of this. Okay. You can actually change the scale of that pattern here, so you can kind of make this smaller or larger, okay, depending on, you know, the look that you're going for. So maybe you kind of want this rock kind of border, and I kind of like that, but I'd like it to be maybe beveled a little bit. Yeah, I kind of like that. So once you're done playing around in here, you just hit OK, and you know, this is what your layer ends up looking like. It has the frame on it, and now it's added the effects, because you can turn the effects off or on, or you can turn off just one, like the pattern overlay or the bevel, okay, or both. If you want to add something or change something, you can just double click on effects and it will pull the layer effects back up. So at any time you can change this sort of stuff. So maybe I want to change the color of this a little bit. So I'm going to just double click on this, and I'm going to go to color overlay. So when I go to color overlay, notice it's on top of pattern overlay. So it overpowers the pattern overlay, and I can't see the pattern anymore. But I want my pattern to be red. So we have things called blending modes and opacities. The first one to understand easily is opacity, which basically right now it's 100% opaque, so I can't see through it. But if it was like glass and I had a 50% transparency, I could move this down to say 50, okay, like right around 50, like that, and you can see how it's overlaying that red on top of that now, so it gives us that illusion of a red kind of marble background. Okay, so if it's 100%, you can't see through it. If it's 50%, you can see through it, or variations of that. The other thing that you can do is something called blending modes, where you can blend one color into another color. So by default, okay, you can do things like darken, lighten, overlay, differences in hues and saturations. So again, this is something to play with, and we'll be looking at these blending modes in more detail later. But for right now, say I wanted to click on darken, okay, you can see how it basically takes the red areas and the darker areas of the image underneath and blends them together. Okay, if I do lighten, okay, you can see how it makes it lighter and blends things together. If I do overlay, it just overlays. So you can kind of play with those and just kind of see what you want to do. If I hit OK, okay, now we've had this color overlay on here. Maybe you don't like it, maybe you do. Okay, these are the kind of what if situations you can do with a client.